Hello and welcome back to Animal Based In Your Face with Scott and Pam. Today we're going to be making a carnivore bread from the Carnivore Code Cookbook by Dr. Paul Saladino. These are the ingredients that you're going to need. Pork rinds. You're going to need to grind these and make them into a fine powder in your food processor or purchase them already ground up. You're going to need 9 ounces total. You also want to make sure you go through your pork rinds and pick out all the real hard pieces so it doesn't end up in your bread. You will need to have 1 tablespoon of butter to grease your loaf pan, 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm using the pink Himalayan, a half a teaspoon of baking powder. You will need 10 eggs separated and 2 egg whites. So you can either do 12 eggs and hold off 2 of the yolks, or you can do 10 eggs separated and just use liquid egg whites like I'm using. Grab you a couple of mixing bowls, a hand blender. I'm going to be using my KitchenAid today. And let's get started mixing. The pork rinds we use are from Sam's Club. They come in huge containers. They're fried in their own rendered fat. Then I just make my own pork rind crumble. So we're going to take those 9 ounces of ground pork rinds and we're going to dump them in a medium mixing bowl. Once you get your pork rinds in your mixing bowl, you're going to add your 1 teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of your baking powder. Next, we're going to take a spoon or whatever you have on hand and we're going to mix this up really good. All right, it's mixed in really well. I've been double checking for the hard crunchy pieces that you find in pork rinds and throwing those out. Next, we're going to set this aside and we're going to go ahead and start separating our eggs. Next, you're going to need to take 10 large eggs and separate them. Separate the yolks and the whites. I mentioned earlier I'm using liquid egg whites because you're going to need 2 additional whites. And if you're using the liquid egg whites, 2 large eggs would be 1/3 of a cup. So that's what I'm going to be using. If you don't have egg whites on hand, you can use 12 eggs and just save 2 of the yolks for later when you're cooking. Let's go ahead and get our eggs separated. While we're separating our eggs, let's go ahead and preheat our oven to 350 degrees. Now, I have a quick preheat, so I'm going to do that so it heats up quicker. Now I'm using my OXO egg separator and I just want to give y'all a tip. You can see that the egg white sometimes gets stuck, and I've showed this before on another recipe. If you just raise that up and take a pair of kitchen scissors and cut the whites off, then you won't have to worry about it hanging like this and being stuck. It's super easy because if you don't cut it, then it's just going to be hanging there forever. So that's just one of my tips for you. My 10 egg yolks are set aside. I have my 10 egg whites in my KitchenAid mixer, and I'm going to add 2 more egg whites, which is 1/3 of a cup. So these were the 10 for my fresh eggs, and these are the 2 from my liquid egg whites. Next, I'm going to go ahead and beat my 12 egg whites. Now, I'm using a KitchenAid, but you can also use a hand mixer. And you're going to want to beat these on high until they form really stiff peaks. So stiff that when you turn your bowl upside down, they would not fall out. While our egg whites are getting stiff, I wanted to go ahead and get our loaf pan ready. Now this recipe actually calls for you to take like a silicone brush, or however you want to do it. You can use a paper towel and grease your loaf pan with 1 tablespoon of butter. Now I'm going to choose to use parchment paper, and you can watch our YouTube channel on the different ways that you can line a bread pan. There's so many different ways to do it, but today I am using parchment paper. If you do not want to use parchment paper, the original recipe does call for you to just grease your pan with butter. So do whatever way works for you, but this is the way I'm doing it today. Before I start mixing the pork rinds and the egg yolks in my whites, I just wanted to let you know this is a Nordic Ware 1.5 pound loaf pan. It's a 9 by 5, and I just think this more mimics a regular loaf of bread, the size. So I prefer it. You can use, whatever loaf you like, but this is the perfect size. I got it off Amazon, and I'll put the link in the description in case you're interested in looking at it. Make sure you're not over whipping your egg whites. You don't want them to get dry and clumpy and start separating. If you are over whipping them too much, they will get that way. So just keep an eye on them and make sure they're just forming stiff peaks. In my KitchenAid mixer, that took no time at all, but goodness, you can see the really stiff peaks, and that's what you want. So if I took this bowl off, turned it upside down, it would not fall out. Okay, 10 egg yolks are beat smooth. I whisked them. You want them just like that. You're gonna set those aside for just a minute. We're gonna get our egg whites out, and then we're gonna dump half of our pork rinds in our egg whites and fold them gently. So I dumped in half of the pork rinds, and then I'm going to fold them in gently. Once they're folded in, then I will dump in the other half of the pork rinds. I'm not left-handed, but you're not stirring, you're folding, okay? And they should still stay, nice and fluffy, but we're just gonna fold them just like this, okay? You see my motion? I'm gonna stop so I can do it correctly, but we're folding it. Okay, I'm dumping in the last half of the pork rinds. We're gonna fold those in. Next, we're going to take our yolks and we're going to fold them in our egg white pork rind mixture. Now they will deflate some because fat makes them deflate, but they still should hold some shape. So pour them in and fold them gently and quickly. Now that everything's mixed, we're gonna go ahead and dump it in our bread pan. Once you get your ingredients in your loaf pan, then you just wanna smooth it all out, make sure there's no air pockets, and then you wanna try to form a small peak down the middle of your bread. What I'm doing is I'm just taking one of my small spatulas and I'm pulling it off the edge, and then I'm just putting it up in the middle just to form a little higher peak in the center of the bread loaf. Once you're done with this, you'll be ready for the oven. Okay, next we're putting it in the oven at 350 degrees. The recipe calls for 30 minutes. Now all ovens cook totally different, especially my top one versus my bottom. So this one seems to cook a little bit slower. So you're gonna wanna make sure you set a timer for 30 minutes and then you wanna check it. And it's not ready until it's no longer soft. Now, several of the loaves I've made before, it's taken 55 minutes for me. So you just wanna check it at 30 and I'll show you what it shouldn't look like. While our bread is cooking, I just wanted to show you where this recipe came from, the Carnivore Code Cookbook. Not everybody has this, but it is full of a lot of great information about the animal-based diet, and it's full of delicious recipes. I'll put the link in the description on where to purchase this, but if you don't have it, it's okay, because we're gonna be cooking up and baking up some of the delicious meals that are in this book right here on our YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe. My 30-minute timer just went off. Now remember, this is my slower oven, but I want to show you how I know it's not ready because I have learned from experience. You see this? It's still really soft. It's firmer on the ends, but the middle is still squishy. That means if I pull it out right now, like the recipe says at 30 minutes, it's going to be wet in the middle and not set, and it will cave in and you'll get a hole in it. So I'm setting another timer for my oven for 15 more minutes, and I'll check it at 45 minutes. But it's looking good. My timer just went off. It's been 45 minutes. Remember, your oven probably cooks totally different than mine. It's getting a nice light browning on the top. My last loaf took 55 minutes. And I'm just testing this one to see how we're looking at 45. It's pretty firm, you can see. I'm still gonna go just a couple of more minutes, probably 10, because I know what it's like if it doesn't get cooked enough. So if yours is done and it's not soft anymore, then go ahead and pull it. But from experience, I just want mine a little bit firmer. It's been 55 minutes for my oven. Yours may have been different. But look at the color, the texture, and let's see if it's firmer. It is firmer. So that's telling me it's done. If yours is still soft, then you need to let it cook a little bit longer. It is a learning experience with this loaf of bread. So I'm gonna go ahead and take it out. You're gonna need a cooling rack to put this on, just to get it up so it can cool faster. But let me close my oven and turn it off, and then I wanna talk to you just about some things I've learned with making this loaf. Remember, the original recipe told us to butter the pan with a tablespoon of butter, but I chose to use parchment paper from experience of making this loaf. Now, if you did use butter, that's okay. I just want to tell you what you need to do right now. If you use the butter and no parchment paper, let it sit on the cooling rack until it's totally cool. So it's going to be sitting here for a little while. But since we've used parchment paper for mine, I can go ahead and lift this right out. It's super easy. And just set it on the cooling rack and it will cool quicker. If you use the butter, once it's completely cool, and I mean completely, you're going to need to take like a butter knife or any thin knife you have, and you'll go around the edges and loosen it to get it out. Now, my first loaf, I did the butter and it stuck a little bit. It was a little bit more tough to get out of the pan. That's why I started using the parchment paper, but it still came out delicious and beautiful. So I just think parchment paper is easier, and it's easier to get it out of the pan. It's just easier all the way around. But do what works for you. This is what works for me. But look at that loaf. Absolutely beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and lift mine out of the pan. Super easy. Took 2 seconds to lift it out. And look, clean pan. I don't have to do anything to it. It's ready for another loaf. So I absolutely love making this with parchment paper. I am going to say, if you're doing the parchment paper, I just pull it back and I just let it sit here until it's totally cooled off. And once it's cooled, then I'm going to go ahead and slice it. But another great thing about the parchment paper, since you're using so much pork rinds in this recipe, it helps soak up some of that greasiness that you get from pork rinds. But I think y'all are going to love this bread. I mean, look at it. It's absolutely beautiful. Once it cools, we're going to come back and you can cut it any thickness you want, but I'm going to show you from experience my favorite thickness. I just removed the loaf from the parchment paper. So easy. I just flipped it over and pulled it off. And that is the simplicity of parchment paper. I have our loaf on the cutting board. And I was going to show you the loaf I did first today. I'm storing it in this. Now this is a Pampered Chef dish. It's glass. I've had it. It's just something I have on hand. And it's perfect for my loaf pan. So you can put this in the refrigerator and store it in a tight sealed container up to 4 days. It freezes perfectly. And so if you're just by yourself at home and you're the only one eating it, I would freeze some and then pull out a slice at a time. You could also put little pieces of parchment paper in between each one if you're worried about it sticking when you freeze it. So that is how I store mine. And mine is definitely gone in 4 days because I love to eat it at breakfast with omelets. And it's also perfect for sandwiches. If you do sandwiches, like you could do a roast beef sandwich. Like if you make a fresh roast, it would be perfect. You could do egg in a holes for breakfast. I haven't tried it with French toast to see how it soaks up the egg, but that would be something you want to experiment with. Or goodness, just go get you some Kerrygold. We have fresh raw honey in our house at all times because our neighbors have bees and keep us well stocked. But goodness, just go throw this in the toaster. It toasts fantastic. And then put just some Kerrygold on it with some raw honey. Eat it with some eggs and bacon. And there is a delicious breakfast or with an omelet. All right, let's cut into this loaf. All you're going to need is your cutting board and a really good bread knife. I'll put the link in the description to this, but we have the whole set, but you can buy it individually on Amazon. We've had these for years. They're fantastic knives. I just cut up my second loaf. I got 16 slices out of it, just like my first loaf over there in the container. I think you guys are going to love this bread recipe. You don't have to worry about it sinking in, and it just tastes great. It doesn't taste like the egg white bread. The pork rinds with the egg whites and then the yolks just give it the perfect taste. I hope you guys enjoy this recipe. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Be sure to find us on Facebook in our support group at Animal Based in Your Face Tribe. Then subscribe to us on YouTube at Animal Based in Your Face. If you click the bell, you'll get notifications anytime we release new content. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more recipes.